Have you ever watched someone smile at a dinner party, pour wine for their guests, laugh at all the right moments, and known with absolute certainty that the person sitting next to them was dying inside? That was Diane Okonkwo. Every Saturday evening without fail. She was 31 years old when the truth finally came out. 31, with a teaching degree from the University of Toronto, a small gold ring on her left hand, and bruises she had learned to cover with the kind of foundation that promised full coverage in 3 easy steps. She taught grade 4 at Ridgeline Elementary in Barrie, Ontario. Her students made her cards on Valentine's Day. Her colleagues said she had a gift. Nobody at Ridgeline knew what happened after she pulled into her driveway on Elmfield Crescent and the garage door came down behind her. Nobody knew about Victor. Victor Ashby was 43 years old and one of the most respected cardiologists in Simcoe County. His name was on the donor wall at Royal Victoria Regional Health Centre. He coached a youth hockey team on Sunday mornings and always brought extra coffee for the other parents on the bench. He was the kind of man who remembered your birthday, who held doors, who made the nurses laugh during rounds. People used the word dedicated. People used the word genuine. Diane had met him at a friend's engagement party in Mississauga 7 years earlier. She was 24 and had just started her teaching placement. He was 36 and had recently been named chief of cardiology. Everyone at that party said the same thing: he's one of the good ones. She believed them. The first year was what she would later describe, in a voice carefully stripped of emotion, as almost perfect. He was attentive, thoughtful. He remembered the little things, the way she took her tea, that she couldn't sleep with the ceiling fan on, that her mother's birthday was March 7th. He called her his person in front of other people, and she felt, genuinely felt, that she had found something rare. They married 18 months after they met, in a small ceremony in Collingwood. Her sister Adora flew in from Calgary. Her mother cried. Victor gave a speech that made the room go quiet, in that particular way that means something true has just been said. Diane wore her grandmother's pearl earrings. She kept them in a little velvet box in the back of her underwear drawer for years afterward, because she could not bring herself to wear them, and she could not bring herself to throw them away. The first time, it was a Tuesday. She had come home late from a parent-teacher evening and dinner wasn't ready. That was it. That was the whole of it. She hadn't called ahead. She hadn't thought to. She had been a teacher for 3 years by then and parent-teacher evenings were on the school calendar, had been on the calendar since September, and it simply had not occurred to her that this required a phone call. He didn't hit her that time. He grabbed her by the wrist hard enough to leave a ring of bruised skin, pressed her back against the kitchen counter, and told her in a voice she had never heard before, low, deliberate, precise, that she needed to be more considerate of his time. She told herself it was stress. He was overworked. The hospital was short-staffed. She had read articles about physician burnout. She made dinner and they ate and he was, by the time the plates were cleared, almost warm again. That was the first Tuesday. There would be many more Tuesdays. Over the following year, the geography of their house changed. There were rooms Diane moved through carefully, at certain hours, in certain moods. The kitchen after 6 p.m. The hallway near the garage when he came home from a difficult call. The living room, if there was a hockey game on and something had gone wrong at work. She became fluent in a language she had never been taught. The specific weight of his footsteps on the front steps, whether the car door shut once or twice, the exact timbre of the silence, that meant she had approximately 45 seconds to make herself smaller. She covered the first bruise with concealer and said she had bumped into a shelf at school. The second she said was from moving boxes in the storage room. By the fourth or fifth she had stopped narrating. She just covered and moved on. She told no one. Not Adaora, who was 2 provinces away and had a new baby and did not need this. Not her mother, who had loved Victor immediately and said once in the gentle way mothers sometimes say devastating things, that Diane had finally chosen wisely. Not her colleagues at Ridgeline, who would look at her differently forever after, and she knew it. There are people who ask why women stay, and Diane had heard that question many times in the years that followed. She always answered the same way. Because leaving in those early months had not yet become conceivable. The mind does not move in straight lines. It circles, it bargains. It builds explanations the way a body builds scar tissue. Not out of weakness, but out of the ancient, desperate need to keep functioning. She functioned. She taught her grade 4s about fractions and the water cycle and how to write a sentence that meant something. She made lunches and attended staff meetings and smiled at her mother on FaceTime. She functioned so well that for a long time, the gap between her public life and her private one felt almost manageable. Victor helped with that. He was not cruel every day. That was the thing people never understood, the thing that made the pattern so difficult to name from the inside. There were weeks, sometimes whole months, that were almost like before. He brought her flowers from the berry farmer's market. He rubbed her feet when she came home exhausted. He cooked the egusi soup her mother had taught her, badly but earnestly, and they laughed about it. In those weeks, she thought, this is the real him, the other version is the aberration. She was wrong. About 2 years in, something shifted. The incidents became less predictable and more severe. She had learned to read the warning signs, but they were moving, and she was always one step behind. A bad day at the hospital that she couldn't have known about. A conversation at a dinner party where she had laughed too loudly at another man's joke. A morning when her phone rang and she stepped into the other room to take it, and this ordinary, unremarkable thing, became, in his accounting, proof of something. He never used the word control. He used words like consideration and respect and partnership. He said she needed to think about how her behavior affected the people who loved her. He said she was lucky to have someone who cared enough to be honest with her. She started carrying a notebook. Not immediately. Not with any plan. She started writing things down the way a person in a very cold room starts moving. Automatically, without knowing they've decided to survive. The notebook was small and had a blue cover, and she kept it behind a loose piece of trim in the back of her classroom closet at Ridgeline, because she had understood by then that nowhere in her house was safe. She wrote dates, times, what had happened in plain factual language. She did not editorialize. She wrote, Tuesday, March 4, left wrist. Grabbed when I asked about changing weekend plans. Purplish bruise, visible by Thursday, faded by following week. No witnesses. She did not know yet exactly why she was writing it down. She knew only that it felt important. That the act of putting words on paper was a way of insisting, to herself at minimum, that these things were real, that she was real, that what was happening to her was happening. Her sister Adaora came to visit that September with her 2-year-old son, and Diane spent 4 days being extremely, exhaustingly careful. She wore long sleeves in 30-degree weather. She watched Victor perform his warmth for Adaora, with the fluency of a man who had been doing it for years. Refilling her wine, charming the toddler, asking questions about Calgary, with apparent interest, and she felt something cold settle in her chest that had not been there before. She recognized it later as clarity. The night before Adora flew home, after Victor had gone to bed, the two sisters sat in the kitchen with chamomile tea and the monitor for Adora's son between them. Adora said quietly, not quite looking at her, Di, is everything okay with you? Diane said yes. She said she was tired, end of semester. She said she was fine. Adora looked at her for a moment longer than necessary. Then she said, okay, but if it ever wasn't, you would tell me, right? Diane said. Of course she did not tell her, not that night. There are things Diane has said publicly in the years since that she will not elaborate on when asked to go deeper. What happened in the 23rd month of their marriage is one of them. She has said only that it was the night she understood she could not wait much longer, and that she had understood it not as a thought but as a physical fact, the way you understand the edge of a cliff. She called in sick the next day. She sat in her car in the Ridgeline parking lot for 40 minutes. Then she went into school, taught her grade 4's long division, and on her lunch break, in the supply closet off the main hallway, she called Adora. She talked for 38 minutes. She did not cry until the last 5. Adora, who is a paralegal and had been one for 11 years, listened to all of it. When Diane was done, Adora was quiet for a moment and then she said, I need you to keep writing everything down. Can you do that? Diane said she already was. There was a pause on the line. Then Adora said, good, we have time, but not a lot of it. What followed was not a single dramatic plan. It was a series of quiet decisions made over 6 months, most of them invisible. Adora connected her with a lawyer in Barrie, a family law attorney named Miss Tremblay who specialized in high-conflict separations and who had, Adora had confirmed, dealt with physicians before. She understood how men like Victor operated. She understood the gap between public persona and private reality. She had seen it and built cases around it, and she was not easily impressed by a good reputation. Miss Tremblay told Diane, document everything. She told her not to discuss the plan with anyone beyond Adora. She told her not to change her behavior at home in any visible way, not yet. She told her to open a bank account in her own name at a branch across town and to start moving money in very small amounts so that when the time came she would not be starting from nothing. Diane did all of it. She was frightened every day and she did it anyway. She also, on Miss Tremblay's advice, had a conversation she had been putting off with her family doctor, a woman she had seen for years and trusted. She went in for what she listed as a routine appointment. She told her doctor everything. Her doctor documented it. Diane signed the forms. There was now a medical record. She kept teaching, she kept making dinner. She kept attending Victor's hospital events in the dresses he preferred, smiling at the people who admired him, telling colleagues he was wonderful. She was building a case. The situation changed in late winter. Victor was passed over for a senior clinical leadership role he had been anticipating for 2 years. It went to a colleague he disliked, a woman who was younger than him and had, in his assessment, been given advantages he had not. He came home that evening and the house changed its temperature. Diane had made pasta. She had not known. She had made pasta and it was sitting in a colander in the sink, and he walked into the kitchen and looked at it and said, "Really?" She knew. She recognized the shape of the night from 100 previous nights, and her body knew it before her mind completed the thought. What she had not anticipated was that he had been drinking before he came home. She does not describe in detail what happened next. She has said that it was the worst night of the 2 years, and that by morning, when Victor had gone to the hospital, she sat at the kitchen table and called Adara and said, I need to go now." Adara said, "I know, we're ready." She left on a Wednesday. She told Victor she was staying late at school for a student showcase. She packed what she could carry in a single bag: her documents, her notebook, the velvet box with her grandmother's earrings, a change of clothes, her laptop. She had moved enough money over the previous 6 months to cover first and last month's rent on a small apartment on the north side of Barrie that Adaora had found and paid for in advance under her own name. She did not leave a note. Miss Tremblay had told her not to. She drove to Ridgeline, cleared out the back of the closet, took the notebook. She sat in her car in the empty parking lot for a long time. The school was dark. The sky above the Barrie waterfront was the color it gets in late February, that particular gray-white that means more snow is coming. She drove to the apartment. She sat on the floor of the empty living room, with her back against the wall and her bag beside her, and she breathed. Victor called 12 times that evening. She did not answer. He called her school the next morning. She had already spoken with the principal, who had been, to Diane's deep and permanent gratitude, neither dismissive nor dramatic. Simply, "We'll handle it. You take care of yourself." He showed up at the school on the 3rd day. The principal met him in the parking lot and told him to leave. He did not make a scene. Victor Ashby never made scenes in public. That was the whole problem and the whole advantage. Miss Tremblay filed the separation papers the following week. She filed for a peace bond simultaneously. Victor hired a lawyer within 48 hours, a senior partner at a firm in Toronto. The legal process was not quick or clean. It was expensive and it was slow, and there were weeks when Diane sat in her apartment after school grading papers and wondering if it was going to work, if what she had was enough, if he was simply going to outlast her with money and reputation, and the story he had been building for 7 years. He had told people, she found out later, that she had left without warning, that he was blindsided, that he was worried about her. He used the word erratic. He used the phrase mental health challenges, the very things he had spent years engineering in her: isolation, self-doubt, dependence. He was now offering as the explanation for why she had gone. She had anticipated this, so had Miss Tremblay. The notebook had dates, the medical record had dates. Adaora had the phone call from the supply closet, time-stamped. There was, slowly and then all at once, a record. Not just her word against his, a record. The proceeding took 11 months. At no point was Diane required to be in the same room as Victor. Miss Tremblay managed that carefully. Diane testified twice, once in a brief in-person session, that Victor's lawyer had pushed for and had clearly expected to go differently. She answered every question in the same flat, precise language she had used in her notebook. She did not cry. She did not elaborate beyond what was asked. She had prepared for that room for 2 years. Victor's lawyer tried 3 separate arguments: that Diane's account was exaggerated, that the documented incidents were ambiguous, that her mental state at the time of separation was unstable. Miss Tremblay addressed all 3. The medical records addressed the ambiguity. The timeline in the notebook, cross-referenced with Victor's own hospital schedule, which Miss Tremblay had subpoenaed, addressed the credibility question. And a statement from Adora, who had traveled from Calgary to give it in person, addressed his claim that the marriage had been fundamentally healthy. The judge was a woman in her late 50s with cropped gray hair, and a manner that was entirely unimpressed. She heard everything. She ruled. Victor Ashby was convicted of criminal harassment and assault causing bodily harm. He was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of probation. He lost his medical license pending a review that would ultimately result in its permanent suspension. His name came off the donor wall at Royal Victoria. The youth hockey team got a new coach. He did not, in the end, outlast her. Diane still teaches at Ridgeline. She moved back to her original classroom after 8 months in the apartment, bought a small house on the east side of Barrie, with a yard that has a sugar maple in it, large enough to have seen several generations of this neighborhood. She is 34 now. She still uses the same brand of foundation she used during those years, because some habits are hard to break, but she uses it differently. The notebook is in her house somewhere. She has not read it since the day she handed it to Miss Tremblay. She says she doesn't need to. She knows what it says. She and Adora talk every Sunday evening. Their mother calls on Wednesdays. 2 years ago, Diane partnered with a Barrie-based women's shelter called Crossroads to develop a resource guide specifically for women in high-functioning abusive relationships. The kind where the abuser is admired. The kind where the proof is slow to accumulate. The kind where leaving requires building an entire infrastructure before you can walk out the door. The guide is called Before You Go. It has been downloaded over 40,000 times. It is free. It is available in 6 languages. She had a conversation recently with a journalist who asked her what she wanted people to take from her story. She thought about it for a moment. Outside the cafe where they were sitting, the main street of Barrie was doing its ordinary Saturday afternoon things. Kids on bikes, a dog pulling toward a garbage can. Somebody's grandmother reading a paperback on a bench. She said, "I want people to understand that documentation is not just paperwork. It's a way of telling yourself that you matter, that what's happening to you is real, that there will be a future in which it is past tense, and you will need to be able to describe it clearly." She picked up her coffee. She said, "I kept writing because I had to believe there would be something on the other side worth writing toward. The maple in her backyard is just starting to come back this time of year, the way maples do in Ontario. Slowly, then with something that looks almost like confidence. She is still here.